go ahead and start with being a teenager during the Depression days.
Oh,
Because we were living, my mother and my siblings were living with my grandmother because our home life had kind of fallen apart. And so my grandmother, who was the daughter of Samuel Shakota, she was the last daughter, and her mother was Priscilla. Priscilla, I can't remember her maiden name, but she was half Scots. Because, you know, the Scotsmen were the ones that intermarried with the Creeks so much when they came over.
yeah.
So anyway, that's why some of my relatives have red hair. And one of my nephews suffered from PKU, which is definitely a Scottish disease.
Ah,
Okay, but anyway, we lived with my grandmother. We had no car, so we would walk to Newtown, and my grandmother lived about 2 miles south of Preston. And so we would start out, my grandmother would have her little pot of groceries or something to eat. And so we would walk from that place down to Newtown, and I figured that it was probably maybe as much as 8 miles. And so sometimes when my cousins would come in, we all just, you know, played around, and my poor grandmother was carrying her little pot of food. And so we'd walk down on a Sunday and stay there until after Sunday school. They had Sunday school in the afternoon back in the 30s. And so anyway, we'd stay there, and fortunately there was somebody that had a car and they would bring us back home. So anyway, and then we would have the services on Christmas, but we'd move down for a whole week. When school was out, we loaded up and usually went down in a wagon and traveled on down there because we knew we were going to be there all week long. And so we would get to the church, and so they would have, you know, little kind of night services, but the big services would be on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. And so anyway, at that time there was no fellowship hall, and there were the camp houses around, like they talked about yesterday. And so we would, and lots of times, I think, on New Year's Day, Eve and Day, the church would last all night long. And so then on Christmas Day, though, after the church service was over, since we had no fellowship hall or dining hall, everybody would bring their food in to the church. And this was when they had the one with the steeple. So we had this these two wings, and then we had this kind of aisle that went down. I think the benches were moved back against the wall, so we had room for the tables and benches to sit on so we could eat our Christmas Day dinner. I don't think that I can't recall that we had the same sort of process on New Year's Day. We may have had meals just at the camp houses at that time. I just can't recall that. But anyway, we had a lot of services where we stayed all night carrying on with some kind of sermon and singing, a lot of singing in Creek. And usually, back then, a lot of people went to church. They don't do that anymore, but a lot of people, we had so many people on the all-night services that those two wings would be crowded also. And of course, the bigger room would be crowded. So anyway, we'd have singing and preaching all night long. And then when it came daybreak, especially like for New Year's Day, then the services would cease, and then we'd get ready and probably bring in a little food or eat at the camp house. I can't remember that part of it. All I know is Christmas Day, we ate in the church. So anyway, the thing that we did mainly was that we walked to church. No car.
8 miles.
Yeah.
From
It could have
Preston.
been. It could have been a greater distance. I just never did try and.
Well, there you are. I tried to call you over the weekend.
Huh?
I tried to call you once over the weekend. How you doing?
Oh, fine. She's interviewing me.
Oh.
So.
Oh, I'm
Oh, that's okay.
That's why you're down here. We realized I see what they might have left to sell.
Yeah.
Well, I'll let you go. Did you learn anything? Or you
Not yet. Not yet. The last biopsy was I had such inflammation in my lungs that I think the depression was real hard times because I just really think, and this is just my own idea, I think we were being prepared for World War II so that we would know how to do without things. And so anyway, we used to, at the church, we had all these young men, and I think maybe you've seen their pictures
In the vestibule.
And so we had a lot of young men that were going to church there, and they would have softball games, and so forth and so on, and so we just really had a great congregation at that time. But at that time, hardly anyone had cars and had any money, so we had to make our own entertainment. And so us younger ones, we wouldn't be involved in games, but we could watch, and so anyway, after the war started, all the men started leaving, and I left in 41, and I went to Haskell Institute, and I had graduated from high school and went to Haskell to earn a certificate in business administration. And so I left Newtown, and I didn't come back to Newtown until I got out of service. But before I joined the service, my brother and I, I worked for a powder plant in DeSoto, Kansas, and I got homesick, so I quit my job and came on back. Couldn't find any job here, but I went to the Corps of Engineers, and so they hired me, and my brother and I went out to Dalhart, Texas, and they were building a great big B-17 plant there. So I worked for the Corps of Engineers. I guess my brother and I were there for about a year and a half, but it was so blasted cold in Dalhart, Texas, that it wouldn't come sweeping down. And so I told Sammy, I said, I'm just very uncomfortable in this little trailer house. We couldn't get the furniture working properly,
Yeah.
so
Sammy's your brother?
Sammy's my brother,
Okay.
yeah. And so, and he's deceased now. So anyway, I said, I'm going home. And so he said, well, he would come on home too. So we came back to Okmulgee, and I started looking for a job, and I couldn't find one. So I was in Tulsa, and I guess I saw the recruiting poster for the Navy. So I joined the Navy in January of 1944, and I was discharged June 19, 1946. But I left from Okmulgee at the railroad station, and from Preston, Oklahoma, I ended up in the Bronx, New York City. And that was quite an eye-opener. And so we were at Hunter College. The Navy rented that, I guess, leased it. So that's where all the Navy women learn how to do things the Navy way.
And it's
So-
in the Bronx?
Yeah,
Hunter College? in
Hunter
New York?
College is in the
Oh,
Bronx.
okay.
Yeah. And so anyway, I finished my training there, but while I was there, we were mustering, and so as I was, my group was on the 6th floor of this dormitory. So as we were going down the steps, I kind of looked over the banister, and I saw Julia Harjo down there.
Oh.
And she was the one that we called Hollywood Harjo, because she was always wearing dark glasses, you know. But she was, we had been in Sunday school training at the various churches, because they had to have those classes, they had to have those meetings at churches. They didn't have a Northeast District Center like we have now. So anyway, I hollered at her, and she looked up, waved at me, and I never did see her anymore. Because, see, there were about, I'd say, 30,000 of us there at that one time. So anyway, I finished my boot camp, and the real bad thing about it was, like I was telling somebody, they made us strip down, and we were just a sheet wrapped around us, and then we went down an aisle, and there were pharmacist mates on either side, and we got shots in both arms at one time. So that was kind of rough. But anyway, I thought I was going to get into another work, but they put me in office work again. So I was in yeoman training, went to Cedar Falls, Iowa, but I thought that where Hunter College was blasted cold, because we were on one of the sides of a reservoir, and that north wind coming down from Canada just really froze us. But when I got to Cedar Falls, Iowa, we had the cold wind and the snow and ice too. So anyway, I took my yeoman training there and learned how to do things the Navy way. My first duty station was Camp Wallace, Texas, and the Navy had drained the swamp near the ocean, and it was on the east side of Galveston. And so they put us out there, and I always told everybody that the mosquitoes were so big they almost carried us off, you know. So, but anyway, Camp Wallace was my first duty station, and it was there that I met Bill Reddy, who was a Sioux, and they had a movie theater for us, and so I was standing there, and I noticed that he kept watching me, and so finally he came over and he said, "What tribe are you?" And I said, "Creek." He said, "Well, I'm Sioux." So we had a friendship there. But Camp Wallace was training the young men how to man those LSMs and LSTs, you know, for landing. So anyway, he left, and I guess he was on an LSM. And so anyway, this friend of mine, we decided we wanted to get away from Texas, Camp Wallace, and that swamp. So anyway, they were wanting yeomen up at Norfolk, Virginia, the Naval Air Station there. So we transferred up there, and I was there, I suppose, maybe 8 or 9 months. And then they were wanting office workers in Oahu. So we signed up for that, and Margie and I could have flown over to Honolulu, but what we did, we had a chance to go on a troop ship. And so that was what we did, because we wanted to see what the sailors had to put up with. And we found out. So,
So
yeah.
tell me about that.
So what?
Tell me about what the troops had to put up with on the
Yeah,
ship.
well, anyway, they transported us out in the desert at San Jose, California, and we had to wait for the ship, I guess. I don't know. They never did tell us why they dumped us out there and we had to wait. But finally, I guess our troop ship got ready. Probably they were getting other contingents, because a contingent of Marines were on the same ship. So anyway, our ship came in, so they loaded us up and took us into San Francisco. And so they loaded us on the ship at that point. And one thing they did allow us to do was to go on board ship, and as we were going under the Golden Gate Bridge. So that was really something. So we got out on the ocean, and we had the 4 bunks, and it wasn't stationary. It was those that kind of swing. And so, but we were down in the hold of the ship, and so we learned, how the fellas had to sleep. But fortunately, I was quick enough that I got a low bunk, so I didn't have to clamber up, to get onto the top bunk. So anyway, about the 3rd day, I think, on our way to Honolulu, we ran into a storm. And that was the most awesome thing I have ever seen. The waves were really pounding that ship, and our ship was going up and down like this, and it was kind of frightening, because you stand on that deck and you can't see anything but water. But when you're young, you think you're invincible. You don't think anything can really happen to you. So anyway, we lived through the storm, and we finally got into Honolulu, and Margie and I were assigned to Barbers Point on the, I think it was probably on the west side of Honolulu. And so we went there, and she wasn't, I think she was not in yeoman training, but I think she actually worked on some of the aircraft carrier, But anyway, we got separated, and so anyway, I was assigned to ship service in Oahu, at Barbers Point. And that was where I got to talk to Robert Stack.
Robert Stack? The
Yeah.
actor?
Actor, yeah.
Oh.
And boy, he was a lot better looking than on TV, or
What
the
was-
movies,
What was the circumstance for that
Well,
meeting?
I was working the ship service office, and this Filipino woman was sitting next to me, and he comes in, to the ship service office. So we both start to get up, and I kind of shoved her back in her seat. He ran up there to the counter, and may I help you? He said, I'd like to cash a personal check. So I had to go back and ask the captain, because he was the one that was in charge. And of course, when he knew it was Robert Stack, there was nothing he could say except yes. So, but anyway.
Why would Robert Stack go to...
He was in the Navy.
Oh, he was?
Yeah.
Oh,
in fact,
okay.
he had the wings on.
Oh,
So I guess he
okay.
was flying.
And you recognized him when he came in, and so
Yeah,
that's
because
why
I watched
you...
all the Deanna Durbin movies, and he
Oh.
was in there, So that was how I learned who he was. And so anyway, the war began winding down, and I met a lot of young, nice, very nice young men that came in One was a veteran of Guadalcanal, and then I went with the Marine that was on Saipan, and so we just, I met a bunch of people that were in some of these real fierce battles in the Pacific. But when the war was over, they were having a big beach party on the shore, so one of the gals got a weapons carrier, and so a bunch of us were going down there, and as we were coming back, I heard somebody holler my name, and I turned around, and it was an old classmate from Haskell, Harlan Scott. He was in the Marines, and he was coming in, from the South Pacific. And so he was on his way back to the U.S. So we stopped, and I told him where I was, so he came and saw me before he left to come back to the States. But I never did see him afterward. And when he got back, he was a Mojave. So anyway, when he got back, I think he got into some kind of judicial job. So, but anyway, I had another friend that was a Lakota Sioux, and he had been shot down and had been in the water for quite some time, but they rescued him, so they were sending him back to California for rehab. And so I guess he found out from Harlan that I was where I was, so he tried to see me and call me, but I was out that evening, so I missed him, and I never did see him anymore. But when he got back to South Dakota, he became a state legislator. But when the Korean War started, they called him up again, and he was captured and spent about 18 months in a Chinese prison camp. When he came out of there, he was just skin and bones. But it was after that, when he went back to South Dakota, that he won the race for state legislator. So anyway, the war ended, and I came back. They sent me to New Orleans to be discharged. So June 19th, 1946, I'll always remember that date. So anyway, I got discharged, and I came back home and couldn't find anything to do. So I was just kind of lolling around, and this friend of mine that I was stationed with at Pearl Harbor, she was from East Liverpool, Ohio, and she was going to go to Kent State University, so she talked me into going with her, going to school with her. So I went, my first year of college was at Kent State University, but I just stayed there 1 year because the reason I left Ohio was that on the 1st of April, the snow came pelting down, and I decided this Okie better get home. So I came home. And so anyway, I wanted to finish my education, so I enrolled in East Central at Ada and graduated from there in 1950, I guess it was. And so then I started looking for a teaching job because I got a teacher's certificate, and I could teach either in high school or grade school. So anyway, I finally found a job at an Indian school at Wyandotte, and I taught school up there. And see, I had 2 grades in my class. Previous to that, while I was floating around home and starting back to Newtown, it was there that I met Charlie Coker. And so anyway, we would write to each other while I was at Wyandotte. And so finally he and his brother came up and visited with me, and so later on, I decided I didn't want to stay at Wyandotte because I didn't have a car, and there was nothing. There was just a little grocery store at the foot of the hill, but you had to walk down to it, so I didn't like that idea, so I decided I'd come back to Okmulgee, and I got a job at Preston, my alma mater,
Oh.
and so I taught there for about I think about a year and a half, and so Charlie and I decided to get married, so he was working in Tulsa, so I quit Preston and came to Tulsa and was working there for a company that built powder plants. And so anyway, he lost his job, and so we came back from Tulsa, and I can't remember whether he found the job over at Muskogee first or I did, but I went to work for the Bureau of Indian Affairs at Muskogee, and he was working in a grocery store in Muskogee. So we stayed there, I guess several years, maybe as much as 3 or 4 years, and he lost his job again, and so I said, well, why don't you see if you can get in a government job? So he tried, and he got in the Indian Health Service. But his first duty station was at Pawnee, so.
Had to go back north.
Yeah, so when he went there, I didn't want to stay in Muskogee by myself, so I moved back to Okmulgee. So I started back to Newtown again, and so it was at that point in time that I got interested in teaching Sunday school, and I got some of the district jobs in education, Sunday school. So I did that, and then I think I got one other job that was different, but it still was with children. So I taught Sunday school classes, and then I worked in the district, going around to the other churches. But this was all at Newtown, and I taught some real great kids, and it always made me happy when they remembered me. But I started working for the Bureau in Okmulgee because it was so much trouble traveling back and forth from Okmulgee to Muskogee, and so I found out that there was an opening in Okmulgee, so I came and worked for the Bureau there, and so I retired from there. But I was a participant, I was a worker in children's work all the time that I was in Okmulgee, and we traveled around, some of us district officers, to the other churches, so I was able to, I wrote little skits, and so when we meet at a church, I get some of the preachers. Samson Timms was one of them that had acted in one of my little plays, so I thought I was really on top of the world, getting those preachers to do my bidding. So anyway, that finally, I don't know, I guess maybe I just got worn out or something, because I didn't want to take any more district jobs. And so I just kind of lolled around because I was working. And see, I became realty officer, so I had to do a lot of traveling. So I guess that was one of the main reasons, because we covered 8 counties. And so doing all that traveling and everything, it got pretty tiring. And when you're dealing with land, there's so many complications, and there are so many laws, federal laws regarding Indian lands, restricted Indian lands. And so I just stayed with that, and I still went to Newtown, but I didn't have any more district jobs. But Charlie, he had a real good voice, and so he was a leader, song leader.
Oh.
And
Was he back from Pawnee then?
Oh, yeah, he came, see, I guess he got tired of being so far away from where we were living, and so he came back, and that was, I guess, that was when we built a house, and so he was able to get, no, I'm getting mixed up. I guess it was when he lost his job in Muskogee, and then he went to Pawnee. And in the interim, I think that we built our house, and then he came back and he decided he was going to try for a job somewhere else. So he went to work in Tahlequah, Indian Hospital, Tahlequah, and then he later transferred to the hospital in Ada. And so anyway, he retired from that job, and I retired, but we decided that we were going to travel while we were able. So the first place we went back over to Honolulu, and he saw, we couldn't get on the stations. I couldn't get on